TV is still the center point for a lot of marketing strategies from a video perspective, but more importantly than that, it's how they're using video to drive these social interactions. So it's not necessarily what's new and cool in video per se, it's what's new and cool that can ultimately drive to that one-to-one communication and interaction with a brand and a consumer. The brands have been very forthcoming to say, I don't know necessarily what metrics, I can't tell you, did it turn into more sales? Then you also have a lot of different people saying, even when I can, with digital, know all of these different metrics, the metrics don't necessarily equate to a sale and don't necessarily equate to the perception or the feeling that I've had with a consumer. And so I think there's a lot of uncertainty as to, yes, I can measure things, but what does it ultimately mean as it rolls up to that top brand level perspective? Not necessarily on a media by media or medium by medium perspective. One thing that is clear, and it's interesting, it hasn't come up too much during this conference, but it's the idea of what digital can do as far as the ability to target and reach just those consumers that either they know or they have identified as people who are loyalists to their brand, or have identified as people that will soon be, or they would like to be, loyalists of their brand. And so I think one thing that we haven't necessarily tapped into quite yet, and I believe we are later on this afternoon, is the idea of the targeting and using this audience-based data to help connect brands with their individual consumers that they want to reach. There's a lot of people that are taking both online and offline data, and they're more or less being these warehouses of data, audience-based data. The great thing is it's not identifiable in any way at the personal level. But what we do at a cookie level is work with these different data providers to aggregate the greatest coverage, which ultimately leads to the greatest accuracy and ability to targeting different individuals based off of demographic or behavioral attributes. And I think one thing that was interesting when we were talking about at this conference, Samsung was mentioning that, it's really, we have to change the idea of this 360-degree marketing model or media model, where we say we have our objective and we have to use all of these different screens or different tactics. I think what's interesting in what he said was, what we're going to do is change that. What we do need to do is change that and make that into, I have my goal still in the beginning, or in that center, but it's more about what is the behavior, or more or less the objective that I need to achieve. And then I'll use whatever mediums I need to in order to achieve those, in order to best achieve those. And so I think that's a pretty fundamental shift in how we've been thinking about media, both from a brand perspective, a vendor perspective, and even the broadcast model. Well, definitely a new name, a new brand was a great shift for us. I think it really brought us front and center as far as the industry goes. Whereas before we were much more in the shadows and a little bit on the DL, if you will. Our big thing is this idea of multi-screen addressability, and hopefully we can bring that to life in a very scalable and meaningful way for brands. While it's interesting to test new things, ultimately, as we've seen from this conference, it is about the scalability of products. Niche audiences are great, but I need a lot of those niche audiences to really drive my core objectives, build my brand, and ultimately sell product at the end. So I think that's our big focus for this year.